After the fall of Hiruzen, Jiraiya was directly offered the role of Hokage by the Elders, which is supposed to be a position that's only held by the most powerful shinobi in the Leaf Village. But when Jiraiya declined to take up the mantle, there was only one possible alternative that the Elders would accept: Princess Tsunade. This scene elevates both Jiraiya and Tsunade to the ultimate prestige of being Hokage class fighters, which makes sense as both of them are members of the Legendary Sannin, a group so strong that they're implied to be at the apex of the shinobi world, with Ebisu stating that only a Sannin can possibly defeat another Sannin in battle. And in this video, I'm going to put Ebisu's theory to the test by pitting Jiraiya and Tsunade against each other in a one-on-one versus battle. Starting off, I want to go over all the misconceptions surrounding this matchup, beginning with the argument that Tsunade previously brought Jiraiya to the brink of death. We're told this by Jiraiya himself when he recounts the 2 occasions he's almost died, with the most recent one being his fight against Four Tails Naruto, and the first time occurring when Tsunade clobbered Jiraiya after catching him spying on the hot spring. I've seen this argument used on occasion to argue that Tsunade is stronger than Jiraiya, since he does specifically mention the fact that multiple organs were ruptured from the blow, meaning it's not like the typical gag scene where damage is pretty much immediately shrugged off. I take issue with this reasoning because when Yamato later retells the same story to Naruto, he specifies that Jiraiya was just a boy during the incident, which should completely invalidate the feat because there isn't really any way to link a kid Jiraiya and Tsunade to their adult selves. There's also the added problem that since Tsunade hitting Jiraiya happened completely off screen, it's possible that he was caught off guard by her attack, since he probably wasn't expecting to get caught red-handed. So even though it is true that Tsunade has nearly put Jiraiya down in the past, when you take their age and the surrounding context into account, it doesn't mean that she can beat him in an actual fight. And there is an equally shaky argument in Jiraiya's favor based on the conversation he had with Tsunade when she was contemplating healing Orochimaru's arms, where he says that he will hunt down Tsunade and kill her if she betrays the village. This statement is even easier to object to than the previous one because at this point in the series, Jiraiya just has no knowledge of what the Byakugo seal is capable of. It's implied that Tsunade developed this jutsu after she abandoned the village, since Orochimaru comments that he's not the only one who's created new jutsu and asks her what it does, which is consistent with the seal not being present in all of the previous flashbacks to Tsunade. So, when Jiraiya is yapping about how he can hunt down Tsunade, he's completely oblivious to her having a brand new trump card that massively boosts her power on top of regenerating entire organs and limbs. Couple this with the fact that this is also the most rusty Tsunade has ever been, and it makes perfect sense why Jiraiya is so confident he can take her down, especially since Jiraiya might have tried to go for a sneak attack rather than a fair fight. Getting into how Tsunade actually compares to Jiraiya in terms of raw power, as opposed to the Hermit Sage, all of Tsunade's best showings take place during the war arc. Tsunade's physical strength is easily her most impressive trait, since she could tank 3 of Madara's Yasaka Magatama beads without receiving any visual damage in the aftermath, with the only wound she has being from Madara's Susanoo sword, which she ripped out of her chest right before attacking him. This is a crazy feat because when Madara previously threw individual Susanoo beads at the 5 Kage, they cracked through a combined defense from Gaara and Onoki, which should make Tsunade physically tougher than their ninjutsu, since she took 3 beads that were linked together head-on without notable injuries. Tsunade's durability being above Gaara's sand defense implies that she should be able to completely block attacks from the 4th Raikage, just like he did during the 5 Kage summit, further backing up Madara's general statement that Tsunade's power exceeds A's. This means that at the very least, Tsunade should have Biju level physicality based on A's ability to cut off the horn of the 8 tails and being stated stronger than a pre-war arc B on multiple occasions. despite V's ability to fully transform into the tailed beast. And in reality, Tsunade's striking strength should far exceed this, since she could shatter Madara's Susanoo ribcage, which the Raikage couldn't do even when being amplified by Onoki's weighted boulder jutsu. On the other hand, Jiraiya's best feats all come from his fight with Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki. At this point in the series, Pain was being hyped up as unbeatable in both the manga itself and the third data book, with the only possible exceptions to this rule being Itachi, who had already died, and Obito, who was still concealing his full power. But there's no reason why this would exclude the 5 Kage. Yet, in Sage Mode, Jiraiya was blatantly superior to the Paz individually, with him being capable of completely entrapping the human path in his Mud Swamp Jutsu and overpowering the animal path before it could even cast the summoning jutsu. And even after Nagato destroyed one of Jiraiya's arms by catching him off guard with the Ashura path, he still managed to fight all 6 paths of Pain at once for an extended period of time, as shown by the fact that the environment was completely undamaged, save for the hole the Ashura path made when the 6 paths initially jumped Jiraiya, but is trashed by the time the manga cuts back to their fight. Regardless of if you think Jiraiya or Tsunade's feats are better, they should still roughly be on the same level, since the Sannin are noted to be equal on multiple occasions during part 1, and even get compared to the 5 Kage in the second fanbook, which covers up to the Kage Summit. This is relevant because if the members of the Sannin are individually comparable to the 5 Kage, it would imply that they're relative to each other as well. If you want to take anime content into account, this is also supported by Tsunade stating that since Jiraiya lost to Pain, it must be impossible for anyone in the Leaf Village to defeat him, which implies that she's equal to Jiraiya at the bare minimum. While it is possible to argue that Tsunade got stronger after the Kage Summit, which would call her relativity to Jiraiya into question, I personally disagree with this, since she was in a coma leading up to the war, and after waking up, all Tsunade did was take a leadership role at the Alliance's headquarters, meaning there was no significant time for her to train leading up to the Madara fight. So, I think the best interpretation is that Jiraiya and Tsunade should have pretty comparable stats, given the general narrative surrounding the Sannin, which means that we can finally get into how a fight between them would play out. In the beginning of the battle, Tsunade should have a pretty definitive edge over Jiraiya, since she has the benefit of being able to open her Byakugo seal right away, whereas Jiraiya needs a bit of time to summon the Elder Toads and enter Sage Mode. So, since Tsunade will be the only one with access to a higher form in the beginning of the fight, Jiraiya's main goal at this stage should be to stay as far away as possible to avoid getting hit directly while trying to stall so he can charge up enough chakra to summon the Elder Toads, who can then give him nature energy throughout the rest of the battle. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I do think that Jiraiya would be capable of stalling for enough time to enter Sage Mode, because in the manga specifically, it didn't take much time at all, with there only being a fairly brief scuffle where Mr. Gamakin fights the animal path summons between Jiraiya first clapping his hands together and the Elder Toads appearing. Given that Jiraiya also used the summoning jutsu to buy time for him to enter Sage Mode, and the only time we see the Sannin fight each other on screen, they summon the 3-way deadlock, a pretty similar clash of summons is almost assuredly happening here. This means that Gamabunta would likely stalemate Katsuyu for an extended period of time, as the members of the deadlock are all roughly comparable, and Jiraiya can summon a few more of his stronger toads to keep Tsunade herself busy while he tries to enter Sage Mode. Despite dodging Tsunade being easier said than done, it does help that unlike Naruto, Jiraiya can move around even in the middle of entering Sage Mode to avoid a direct confrontation with Tsunade, because he's technically only charging up chakra for the summoning jutsu rather than absorbing nature energy directly, hence why Jiraiya could jump in the air and cast barrier jutsu in his fight against Pain. Of course, it is still going to be difficult for Jiraiya to keep up this song and dance against such a strong opponent, but I do side with him being capable of pulling it off, which means that Jiraiya will be able to confront Tsunade at full power. Once Jiraiya enters Sage Mode, the odds shift quite a bit more towards him, since on top of the massive power boost the form grants, its Sensory boost should allow him to avoid Tsunade's punches even at a close range, as we just see how crazy Sage Mode Sensory can be when a shadow clone of Sage Mode Naruto uses it against the third Raikage. To be fair, Naruto is a complete sage unlike Jiraiya, so you can definitely call into question how good his precognition would be in comparison, especially since Jiraiya doesn't really seem to explicitly sense anything during his fight against Pain. However, considering that the 4th data book does list him as a user of the Frog Kata Taijutsu style, which it says makes use of Sage Mode's power of perception, Jiraiya does have precognition on some level at the very least. So, since Jiraiya should already have comparable speed to Tsunade, when you stack precognition on top of that, he would be very difficult for her to hit, which is supported by the fact that after Jiraiya first activates Sage Mode in the fight against Pain, Nagato never lands a single hit throughout the battle until Jiraiya got caught completely off guard by the Ashura Path and lost an arm. On the other hand, even though Jiraiya may not have as much trouble landing his attacks on Tsunade, his trouble would come from an inability to muster up an attack strong enough to actually take her out. This is because it's hard to say if Jiraiya has anything in his arsenal with significantly more raw power than Madara's Yasaka Magatama beats, which is an issue because Tsunade could just eat those straight up without damage. If you argue that the Sannin have relative stats, even in their higher forms, which is something I agree with, then even at the worst interpretation, Jiraiya's Super Odama Rasengan should be capable of damaging Tsunade, since it's stated to be a maximum output of his chakra, but the much bigger problem is dealing with her regeneration. After all, if Jiraiya manages to destroy Tsunade's organs, or even her limbs with the Rasengan, she should still be able to regenerate them back, and getting in that close against Tsunade is still a pretty big risk, because even though Jiraiya does have great sensory, on the off chance that Tsunade's lucky and manages to get a few hits in, he's probably down for the count. The only way I can see Jiraiya taking down Tsunade with brute force is if he manages to land a Super Odama Rasengan directly to the head, since Tsunade has never shown the ability to regenerate her brain, but this would require Tsunade to see Jiraiya charging up his strongest attack and choose not to block or even attempt to dodge, which is pretty absurd. This probably sounds like a ridiculous stalemate where Tsunade would struggle to land a solid hit and Jiraiya has no attack strong enough to put her down. But there is one technique that tips the scales of the entire fight, which is the Frog Song Genjutsu. It should be obvious that this fight is going to drag on for a while, which means that Frog Song's hefty charge up time shouldn't be much of an issue. And if the Elder Toads manage to cast it, Jiraiya instantly wins. This might seem a bit crazy given Tsunade's insane chakra control, and the fact that if you give her the benefit of the doubt, Katsuyu may be able to disrupt her chakra pool in the same way that an ally would break the Genjutsu. But I don't think that these conventional methods of breaking Genjutsu would work against Frog Song, because it's stated to be the most powerful Genjutsu in the 3rd databook. Given that Databook 3 covers the first 43 volumes of the series, this statement should scale Frog Song over Itachi's Tsukuyomi. So despite Tsunade likely having Genjutsu resistance far above the average shinobi, she almost assuredly would be incapable of breaking through this illusion that surpasses even what Itachi's Mangekyo can do. This doesn't mean that Tsunade is guaranteed to lose, since especially in the beginning of the battle, when Jiraiya is in base form, she could potentially exploit an opening to get a few good hits in and win. But if Tsunade fails to end the fight fairly early and it drags out, which in my opinion is the most likely scenario, Jiraiya should win with Frog Song more times than not. Thanks for watching. I do want to announce that I've launched channel memberships for those of you that would like to support the channel. It gives access to recordings of all future live streams on the channel, including the first one where I ranked every shinobi in Naruto by power. And members will also get to see my upcoming bigger projects a full week before anyone else when they're finished. And, needless to say, if this isn't your thing, I still appreciate you for watching all the same. Later.